Okay, so we're looking at currency and exchange rate. So different countries' money is worth different amounts. So when we exchange money, when we're travelling and we want a different currency, we're effectively buying or selling Australian dollars. So the amount that one Australian dollar buys or sells for in a different currency is the exchange rate. So here, a dollar of a currency, the amount of another currency that it buys or sells for is our exchange rate. Now usually they're on tables. Obviously these days, chances are you'd just use an app if you wanted to calculate the exchange rate, or in fact just Google. So with your phone, 5,000 AUD to New Zealand dollars, there we go. That will calculate that given the appropriate exchange rate. XE is another one that's a really good app to have on your phone if you're traveling. So mostly you'll just use Google or an app for these calculations out there in the real world, but it's a good idea to understand how they work. So where you'll usually get these exchange rates is from a table. So you've got a table in your finance workbook, first page there. And so our example, I'm going to take the New Zealand dollars one because I like New Zealand. Each currency has its little ISO code, so we are AUD, New Zealand is NZD. And when we are buying Australian dollars or selling Australian dollars and trading in with New Zealand dollars, we're going to get different numbers. So from the table, I'm just reading that there, 1.3510 and 1.2063. Now what this means is, when you trade in New Zealand dollars to buy Australian dollars, 1 Australian dollar is worth 1.351 New Zealand dollars. When you trade in Australian dollars to get New Zealand dollars, 1 Australian dollar is worth 1.2063 New Zealand dollars. Now, the difference there is partly so that the banks make a commission. Often we'll get the actual or the average exchange rate, or what the book might call the mid rate, by averaging the buying and selling rate. So if we are averaging the buying and selling rate for New Zealand dollars, add them together and divide by 2. So 1.3510 plus 1.2063. Remember to get the answer there. That will be 2.55573, and dividing that by 2. Now we get 1.27865. Now have a look, they've given us 4 decimal places. That means we'd go to 4 decimal places with a little approximately equals for our average exchange rate of the buying and selling for New Zealand to Australian dollars. So mostly what we'll need to be able to do is convert. Now when you're converting currencies, the easiest rule is this one. So when we're going from Australian dollars to a foreign currency, you multiply by the rate of Australian conversion, or to convert foreign to AUD, we divide. Now if you're in a different country and the exchange rate was focusing on their own currency, then we've got a different matter. But this works when the table, as for the textbook here, is about buying and selling Australian dollars. So use the mid rate, that is the one that we just worked out, to convert 5,000 Australian dollars to New Zealand dollars. We're going from Australian to New Zealand, so we're going to multiply. And it makes a lot of sense because what this little number up here says is that 1 AUD is 1.2787 New Zealand dollars. And we can even start our working with that because it makes a lot of sense. So obviously if 1 Australian dollar is this many New Zealand dollars, then I want 5,000 Australian dollars. So that's 5,000 times 1.2787. Sorry, running out of space here. And do that multiplication. 5,000 times 1.2787. 5,000 AUD is 6393.50 New Zealand dollars. Now, if we were converting New Zealand dollars back to Australian dollars, we divide by the rate. So, this question, 7,000 New Zealand dollars. 7,000, oops, divided by 1.2787. And that's 54,743.31, and that's in AUD. If you're interested, this works just because of ratios, but it's quite okay if you just remember the rule of dividing by the rate. Now sometimes we don't want to use the mid-rate, and so this little example question here. A wedding dress costs 64,000 rupees in India. Calculate the equivalent in AUD. Now I will have to check our table of exchange rates. And the question you have to ask is, technically, are we buying or are we selling Australian dollars? So we're changing into Australian currency. So we use the buying exchange rate because you're moving to Australian dollars. It's like as if you had this many rupees and wanted to get to Australian dollars. Effectively you're buying, so we use the buying rate. We look that up in the table, which is of course there in your workbook. So India rupee buying rate 67.7210. Now, because of course we are going from a foreign currency to an Australian currency, we are going to be dividing. So Australian dollars is 64,000 rupees divided by our exchange rate. $64,000 divided by 67.7210, and that's $945.05. So it was an almost $1,000 wedding dress.